I sipped my coffee and nearly choked upon reading the letter. It was neither a bill nor a tax notice. It was significantly more severe. The official certificate indicated that my 50-acre ranch, land my family had labored on and to which I had devoted considerable effort and resources, was no longer in my possession. At a minimum, not wholly. The Homeowners Association, of which I had never been a member, unilaterally determined, without my awareness or approval, that my ranch was to be classified as communal land for the entire area. I narrowed my eyes at the text, reviewed it, and then proceeded with the only rational course of action. I chuckled. Difficult. However, the amusement ceased upon reaching the section stating that, effective immediately, all fences, barricades, or signage indicating private property must be removed in compliance with HOA regulations. At that moment, my coffee mug collided with the floor, fracturing into numerous fragments. A simmering, intense fury coiled within my chest. These individuals were genuinely earnest. They attempted to appropriate my land. 1 hour later, I positioned myself at the front gate as a tan vehicle, emblazoned with an absurd HOA emblem, approached my driveway as if it were its rightful domain. The door opened, and Margaret Dawson, a middle-aged woman with a rotund physique, emerged wearing a blazer 3 sizes too small. She repositioned her clipboard and approached me with a confidence characteristic of individuals who have never experienced physical confrontation. Behind her, 2 additional HOA board members, similarly self-satisfied and excessively attired, loomed like vultures over a newly deceased cadaver. "Mr. Monroe," she stated, her tone excessively sweetened with insincere courtesy, "we dispatched the notification concerning the community land designation to you. We wish to deliberate about the subsequent actions." I crossed my arms and gazed at her, allowing the stillness to extend until it got awkward. "Subsequent actions," I finally stated. "Yes, I have a subsequent step. These are referred to as trespassing laws." Margaret emitted a slight chuckle, indicating that she perceived me as amusingly foolish. "There appears to be a misunderstanding," she stated. "The board unanimously opted to incorporate your acreage within the HOA authority, as your ranch has always been available to community members for hiking and recreation. From a historical perspective, I severed ties with her. This land has historically been utilized solely for livestock. My property is not included in your homeowners association." Margaret bestowed upon me a condescending smile. "It is currently." I gazed at her, anticipating the joke. No one arrived. She genuinely accepted this absurdity. I observed the 2 board members behind her, both acquiescing like well-conditioned parrots, and experienced an abrupt impulse to hurl an object. I breathed through my nose and maintained an equal tone in my voice. "Allow me to clarify," I stated. "You individuals, who possess no parcel of this land, conducted a poll and concluded that my private property is yours?" Margaret inclined her head, as though elucidating a concept to a notably slow learner. "Not for us, Mr. Monroe. To the community." I was still contemplating the sheer absurdity of this when a silver SUV approached my driveway. The doors opened, and a family of 4 emerged. 2 parents, 2 children, and a golden retriever. They proceeded to my pasture as if they were in a public park. "Hold on, hold on, hold on," I vociferated, advancing toward them. "What are you attempting to accomplish?" The father, a balding individual clad in a golf shirt, regarded me with a smile as if I were the intruder. Margaret stated that the HOA has made this field available for public use, he remarked while throwing a frisbee to his son. We decided to investigate it. Margaret, having followed me, laid a strong hand on my shoulder as though we were long-standing acquaintances. "Jack, this precisely aligns with our previous discussion. Community members relishing their environment." I dismissed her hand and redirected my attention to the family. "This space does not belong to you. This is my property." The wife gazed at me, perplexed. "However," the Homeowners Association stated, "I disregard the statements made by the HOA." I emitted a growl. "Leave my premises." The spouse scowled. "There is no necessity for rudeness, my friend." I was on the verge of notifying him that he was approximately 3 seconds away from having his golf shoes filled with manure when another automobile arrived, succeeded by still another. An increasing number of individuals arrived, carrying picnic baskets, as if I had personally sent invitations for a community barbecue. My ranch was under simultaneous invasion, and I felt ensnared in a surreal nightmare. I turned to Margaret, my patience completely exhausted. Remove these individuals from my property. Currently, her eyes expanded and feigned. Innocence. Oh, Jack, hatred is unnecessary. This transformation will be facilitated by our collective collaboration. I approached, reducing my vocal volume. Margaret, I assure you, if you do not vacate my property, I will personally lead you down the driveway using a garden hose. That ultimately elicited a response. Margaret's self-satisfaction wavered momentarily before she regained her composure. She inhaled sharply while readjusting her blazer. I believe we must elevate this issue. She pivoted sharply and marched back to her vehicle, her subordinates hastily following her. The trespassers, sensing an anomaly, began retreating to their automobiles. As Margaret entered her car, she cast me one more glance. Our attorney will be in contact with you. I smirked deliberately and maliciously. You will receive communication from my shotgun. As soon as they departed, I seized my phone and called Curtis McGraw, my attorney. Curtis was more than merely a lawyer. He was the type of someone who earned a livelihood by defeating overambitious individuals. He responded on the initial ring. I addressed Curtis. Iema fasinga pradikamin. 20 minutes later, I was seated in his office, elucidating all the details. Curtis attentively listened, nodding in agreement, while intermittently jotting down notes. Upon completion, he reclined, gnawing on the tip of his pen. Ah, the quintessential HOA land acquisition, he remarked, exhaling with the weariness of one who has witnessed much turmoil. They lack legal justification, yet they are relying on your acquiescence. I scowled. How can I prevent them? Curtis grinned smugly. One does not only halt them. Your tactics are unscrupulous. I incline my body forward. I am attentive. Curtis drummed his fingers on the desk. The initial action is to render the terrain unusable for them. Deterrence, barriers, signage, security systems, and comprehensive measures are necessary. I have already acquired fences, I murmured. They are indifferent. Subsequently, electrify them, Curtis remarked with a malevolent smile. Ensure that it is entirely lawful. I reclined, contemplating the notion. It was chaotic. It was excessive. I adored it. I devoted the subsequent morning to the county records office, meticulously examining every legal document pertaining to the HOA's jurisdiction. As anticipated, my land was never included in their domain, never transferred, and certainly never designated for public use. However, that did not deter Margaret Dawson from attempting to alter reality. She submitted documentation asserting the incorporation of my land into the Homeowners Association, referencing an obscure community development provision. It was utter absurdity, yet it was absurdity that could jeopardize everything if I did not resist. That afternoon, I entered the HOA's office, a cramped facility connected to the community clubhouse. Margaret sat at a desk, perusing documents, exuding her characteristic smugness. She scarcely looked up upon my entrance. Jack, she uttered with that saccharine tone that unsettled me. I presume you are present to address adherence to the new regulations. I forcefully placed a folder on her desk. I'm come to provide you with a bill. Margaret raised an eyebrow and opened the folder. The official documentation within confirmed that my land had never been subject to HOA authority until their decision to annex it. As they asserted that my property was now included in the association, implied that they were indebted to me. They specifically owed me 2 decades' worth of unpaid homeowners association dues for the land they allegedly maintained. The figure I recorded exceeded $200,000. Margaret's complexion assumed an unexpectedly pale hue. This is preposterous. It is ludicrous for you to believe you can appropriate my land, I stated. Here is the situation. Either the HOA remits the full amount owed to me, or we will escalate this matter to court, where a judge will thoroughly scrutinize your fraudulent land acquisition. Margaret's lips constricted. The board will categorically reject this proposal. I recommend that you devise a method to create them, I stated. Additionally, there is one additional matter to address. Until this matter is resolved, I will implement several alterations to my property. I exited before she could contest. By sunset, I had procured sufficient fencing material to render Alcatraz reminiscent of a playground. The following morning, I commenced work. I initially fortified my fences with industrial-grade wiring. I subsequently constructed a comprehensive security system, including motion sensors, floodlights, cameras, and all associated components. However, the most advantageous aspect? The electrified enclosure. Nothing fatal, of course, but sufficient power to convey a strong warning to any potential intruders. By lunchtime, it became widely known that I was not yielding. Inquisitive neighbors congregated at the periphery of my property, murmuring amongst one another. Some appeared apprehensive, while others seemed entertained. Margaret, nonetheless, was incensed. She approached my gate with urgency, accompanied by 2 HOA board members and gripping a clipboard tightly. She expressed her indignation, stating that this was a blatant infringement of HOA regulations. Amusing, I remarked, leaning nonchalantly against the fence. I do not recall consenting to any HOA regulations, she exclaimed, perusing her documents. Electric fences pose a hazard. Trespassing is what I stated. However, given your group's resolute intent to assert ownership of my property, I have decided to render it more conducive to community use. Margaret's gaze shifted to the large LED sign I had positioned near the entrance of my ranch. In luminous, pulsating letters, it proclaimed, "Warning, trespassers will be zapped." "You are behaving erratically," she stated, her voice trembling with exasperation. "No, I'm merely preparing," I responded. That weekend, the HOA chose to challenge my patience in an exceedingly absurd manner. A substantial neighborhood picnic was scheduled on my property. I was not shocked to observe numerous individuals arranging folding chairs, blankets, and grills in the center of my paddock. Children darted about with kites, dogs pursued frisbees, while an individual audaciously erected a volleyball net. It seemed as though my property had abruptly transformed into a public park. I observed from my porch, drinking a chilled beer, anticipating the unavoidable. Indeed, it was not a lengthy wait. An excessively enthusiastic jogger, immersed in music, collided directly with the electric fence. A loud crackle was followed by a yelp and an awkward stumble backward. A short distance away, a group of children playing soccer struck their ball into the fence, and when one attempted to recover it, he received an electric shock that caused him to yelp and retreat to his parents. Cries, disarray, tumult. It was magnificent. Margaret was the initial individual to recuperate. She navigated the mob with fury, her face flushed and enraged. "This is unlawful," she exclaimed. "No, it is not," I responded. "I have verified, completely compliant with county rules. Also non-lethal. I would not want anyone to sustain catastrophic injuries. A courteous caution to refrain from trespassing on private property." "You are a nuisance," she retorted. "No, I am a property owner," I clarified, a concept that appears to elude your comprehension. Margaret's expression contorted into a distinctly unattractive visage. "This is not concluded," she spat before departing angrily. The following day, I received an official cease and desist letter from the HOA, instructing me to dismantle the electric fences and eliminate all deterrents. I transmitted the letter to Curtis, who nearly guffawed upon reading it. "Do they genuinely believe they can intimidate you into surrendering?" he stated. "This is becoming enjoyable." He drafted a counter-demand, asserting that if the HOA persisted in designating my land as communal property, they would bear the financial responsibility for its maintenance. This entailed expenditures for fence, security, liability insurance, and, naturally, outstanding taxes. By the time the calculations were completed, the HOA owed me a substantial sum, necessitating the imposition of triple charges on each homeowner to offset the expenses. Margaret's reply manifested as an urgent emergency meeting with the HOA board. I was not invited, yet my presence was unnecessary. News disseminated rapidly. Homeowners were incensed upon seeing that their costs were poised to climb dramatically due to Margaret's overreach of authority. Individuals who formerly lauded her are now demanding her departure. 2 days later, I encounter Margaret outside my gate once more, appearing far less assured than previously. She cleared her throat, clutching her clipboard as if it were a vital support. "Mr. Monroe," she began, her voice taut. "The board has reevaluated its position. We are prepared to engage in dialogue for a peaceful resolution." I smiled. "I am attentive." She gulped audibly. "If you consent to dismantle the fences, we will relinquish all HOA claims on your property." I took a prolonged, theatrical sip of my coffee. Enticing. However, there is a pertinent matter, Margaret. I appreciate my boundaries, and I derive considerable pleasure from observing your discomfort. Her expression grew tense. "This constitutes extortion." "No, this represents justice," I replied. "You attempted to usurp my territory. You have been defeated." Margaret fixed her gaze on me for an extended while, her jaw tightened, before ultimately acquiescing with a nod. "Acceptable. The board will conduct a vote to formally expunge your property from the HOA. "That is an excellent beginning," I remarked. "Furthermore, you will be responsible for my legal expenses," she said, her nostrils flaring. "You cannot be serious." I folded my arms. "I'm utterly serious." A silence ensued between us. Subsequently, with evident exertion, she provided a rigid nod. "Very well," I replied with a smile, observing her pivot and depart. The conflict was not concluded. However, I had triumphed in the skirmish. I was not finished exacting retribution from them. Margaret's defeat ought to have concluded the matter. However, I was aware otherwise. Individuals of her caliber do not just acquiesce to defeat. They conspired, strategized, and sought any potential loophole to regain their authority. I remained prepared. I fortified my fences, installed additional security cameras, and ensured my lawyer was prepared for any subsequent issues they could attempt. However, to my astonishment, the situation remained tranquil, excessively silent. A week later, I began to observe peculiar occurrences. A contingent of unfamiliar guys in suits was observed traversing the area, conversing in subdued tones with many HOA board members. Several residents ceased waving at me throughout town, appearing remorseful any time I met their gaze. News rapidly disseminated that the HOA was in a state of acute distress. Homeowners were incensed by the special assessment fees that Margaret attempted to impose, prompting the circulation of a petition calling for her resignation. The situation culminated at the subsequent HOA meeting. Typically, I would not have attended one of their neighborhood cult gatherings, but this occasion was distinct. Their discussion centered on whether Margaret should retain her leadership position. I would not forego that opportunity for anything. I arrived early, seated at the rear, arms crossed as I observed the tumult unfold. As soon as Margaret entered, the tension in the room intensified. She occupied her customary position at the front. However, for the first time, her look lacked smugness and an aura of superiority, revealing only carefully restrained dread. An elderly gentleman, Mr. Wilkes, was the first to rise. He had resided in the neighborhood for decades and had previously been one of Margaret's most ardent supporters. However, this evening, he appeared enraged. "We have reached our limit," he declared, his voice trembling with rage. "Margaret, under your direction, this HOA has transformed from a basic community association into a form of dictatorship. You exceeded your authority, incurred substantial financial losses, and nearly subjected us to litigation." Whispers of consensus spread among the assembly. Margaret began to articulate her defense when another homeowner interrupted her. A woman retorted that Monroe's land was lawfully ours. "You deceived. Your actions have resulted in my family incurring an additional $5,000 in HOA fees this year. Will you reimburse me, Margaret?" Margaret's visage flushed. I was operating in the community's best interests. No, I exclaimed from the rear, inclining forward with a smile. You were prioritizing your own interests. Attention was directed towards me. I rose gradually, allowing the silence to extend before I resumed speaking. Margaret attempted to usurp my property, I declared emphatically. She believed she could intimidate me into relinquishing it, and when that failed, she attempted to overwhelm me with documentation. However, she was unsuccessful. She is now hastily attempting to rectify the chaos she created. Margaret's lips formed a narrow line. You are not a member of this HOA, Monroe. Indeed, I do, I replied with a smirk. Do you recall? You compelled my property into your authority. This implies that I possess a vote. A wave of astonishment coursed through the room. The board members conferred quietly, comprehending the entirety of my statement. Margaret's relentless pursuit of my land inadvertently granted me the authority to vote on her expulsion. An individual signaled for the commencement of the vote. It was not remotely near. Gradually, hands were raised in support of ousting Margaret from the HOA presidency. The ultimate tally was decisively unfavorable to her. Margaret sank in her seat, appearing as though someone had abruptly undermined her entire existence. The following day, I returned to my property, relishing the tranquility, when a moving truck arrived at Margaret's residence. I emerged onto my porch and observed with slight amusement as she paced back and forth, issuing commands to the movers. She had forfeited all, her authority, her sway, her status in the community. She was departing now. I nearly experienced sympathy for her. Nearly. That evening, I had a knock at my door. A contingent of HOA board members appeared visibly anxious. A younger individual called Derek cleared his throat uncomfortably. He stated that we have been conversing. In light of Margaret's departure, we require a new president. I squinted. I must interrupt you at this point. If you want to inquire what I suspect, the response is unequivocally no. Derek elevated his hands. Listen, to us. The HOA has recently encountered significant difficulties. We require an individual of strength, one who will not succumb to the allure of power. I folded my arms. Disinterested. A female board member in her 50s advanced. If you assume the presidency, Jack, you might disband the HOA. That caused me to hesitate. Repeat that. She stated that if you assume control, you might vote to abolish it completely. Eliminate all fees and absurd regulations. Homeowners autonomously overseeing their own properties, as originally intended. I deliberated for an extended while. The prospect of managing a homeowners association repulsed me, yet the notion of definitively terminating their absurdities was appealing. That exhibited potential. I breathed abruptly. Acceptable. I will accomplish it. However, this is contingent upon a single stipulation. Derek assented with enthusiasm. Any item. I do not wish to receive any grievances when I incinerate any of your HOA rulebooks. 1 week later, it became official. The Homeowners Association was disbanded by unanimous vote. Homeowners were permitted to have complete autonomy over their property. Seize penalties for grass exceeding height by 1 inch. Eliminate absurd limitations on paint color selections. No further authoritarian power excursions. Thus, tranquility was restored to the area. To commemorate the occasion, I hosted the largest barbecue the neighborhood had ever witnessed. The aroma of smoked brisket permeated the atmosphere. Beer was abundant, and for the first time in years, individuals genuinely appeared content to reside here. While positioned behind the grill, observing my neighbors reveling in laughter and enjoyment, I experienced an emotion I had not encountered in quite some time. Contentment. Curtis arrived midway through the gathering, shaking his head in amusement. You truly accomplished it, he remarked, seizing a plate of ribs. You dismantled a homeowners association. I smiled smugly. I informed you that I would employ unscrupulous tactics. He chuckled. What will you do with your newfound leisure time? I observed the horizon, where my newly fortified fences stood erect and unopposed. I will devise a solution. With that, I elevated my drink, savoring a prolonged sip as the sun fell behind the horizon. My territory was restored to me. No one would ever confiscate it from me. Neither a homeowners association, nor a bureaucracy, nor any individual.